Hi, I'm Diane Hullett, and welcome to the Best Life, Best Death podcast. Today, I've got this really interesting combination of two hospice chaplains. So, welcome to Ellie Douglas and Kathy Gambino.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, I'm excited. They know each other through the whole hospice world of Boulder, Colorado and Denver, Colorado. And I know them both separately. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have two chaplains and just kind of talk about what is the role of a chaplain? Because I think sometimes people think it's this very religious thing. And if they aren't religious, they might say, oh, I don't need a chaplain. I don't want to talk to that person. But I personally have found in my experience with hospice and family members that the chaplain plays this kind of really beautiful role that I think is powerful. So let's just kind of start with, why don't each of you just kind of talk a little about what got you started in this work?
Yeah, I'm happy to begin. So I grew up with a very spiritual mother and a father who was very open. And so when I was off on my own and went to college, I really started to study and look into different faith systems and became really curious. And I started studying Buddhism. And so Buddhism plays a huge role in what led me to want to care for people at the end of their life. I traveled to India, and my experience there was really pivotal for me wanting to get my master's in divinity. And that's also a really beautiful thing that Kathy and I share is that we both got our master's in divinity at the same place at Naropa University. Um, and there is where we we both began to study how to really provide spiritual support for people at the end of their life.
I love that, just naming it as like spiritual support. And did the two of you know each other when you were in Naropa?
Mhm.
Nice,
Yes.
Yeah.
nice. Kathy, how about you? What brought you into this?
Oh, I was a hospice nurse. That's my background. And I was a nurse for 24 years and then was a hospice nurse for 8 of those. And during that time, both my parents got ill with terminal illnesses. And so I had the good fortune of helping care for them. And after they passed, I had like an existential crisis about death, and I wanted to know how to be with suffering. And because as nurses, we are trained to fix things, right? Or and to help comfort people, make sure they're comfortable at the end of life. So I wanted to do a deep dive into how to the spiritual side of death, both as a healing journey and how I could take that journey deep for others. So I went from a role of nurse where you do with for people and with people to a role where I felt I could be with people at the end of their life, and with whatever that looked like and however that presented.
Wow, that's very Buddhist, right? The be with suffering is really different than trying to fix the suffering.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And so Masters in Divinity, is that pretty typical of a hospice chaplain that they have that training?
Yes, traditionally, that's what's looked for in most hospices, a master's of divinity. There's also, you could have a master's in pastoral education or pastoral counseling. That's also, I've seen chaplains who have that degree, and then others. Ellie, I'm curious what you've run into.
Yeah, others will be in seminary, and then, but every chaplain has to also go through pastoral counseling training, which includes an internship, whether you're at a hospital or with a hospice or um, even military or disaster relief chaplains. Um, so they want you to have your field experience before you truly enter into the field as well.
That makes sense. And does every hospice have a chaplain?
Yes, it's
Yes.
required. It's part of a Medicare requirement to have a chaplain, or I think they sometimes say pastoral counselor. in the Medicare regs. So yes, it's part of the interdisciplinary team, that
Interesting.
social support.
Can you say a little bit about that team and then say a little bit about when your piece steps in with a family, what do you typically do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite incredible that the spiritual part is part of the regulation um, for hospice care. You know, it's holistic care, and so when we're caring for someone at the end of their life, we're caring for the physical. You have your nurse, the emotional, social worker, often spiritual chaplain. Then you have your caregivers and your doctor and a whole team. It takes a whole team to provide that holistic, whole self care. And oftentimes, a chaplain is a spiritual companion. Um, if someone is religious, then we provide that coordination with churches and the people that they want by their side. Um, but so much of our job is providing that space of being with suffering and being present and listening, um, and really providing a compassionate container for individuals as they are at the end of their life and asking bigger questions and being faced with fear, and wanting to help cultivate a sense of peace for them.
Beautiful, because so much what I hear people talk about is a fear of death and a fear of dying and a fear of suffering. And you're
Mhm.
really talking about how, in your role, can you help create this compassionate container that can hold all of that? And so, Kathy, why don't you speak to like, what do you typically, how do you step in? You show up at
Yeah,
someone's home or you show up at a hospital,
sure.
but
Sure. And I so appreciate it. I want to circle back to what you said at the beginning, Diana, how some people hear, ooh, chaplain, and oh, I'm not religious, or ooh, or some people, the word chaplain can be a little bit loaded depending on people's religious or spiritual or just life experience and their history. And so what I usually do is the admission nurse will ask the family, would you like a chaplain to be part of your team? Because they have a choice. They can choose to say no to a chaplain or a spiritual care provider. They can say no to social worker. This is about the family and what they need, and the patient and what they want, and honoring them and just walking alongside them. So someone gets admitted to hospice, they're asked if the chaplain could reach out to them. And if they say yes, I'll call them and introduce myself and just say, I'm just here to, let's say I'm talking to a daughter. I'm just here to meet your mother where she is. I have no agenda. I'm just here to be a support and walk alongside you and be of any help I can. Um, and then ask if can set up and meet with them. So it's kind of defining that role, like Ellie said, spiritual companion. Like we walk alongside them. When I go out to see a family, I do not have an agenda. My whole purpose is to meet them where they are, build rapport, just to hold space for whatever is going on with them, and just be with and allow whatever is happening to them, and just be with them with whatever's happening in that day, in that moment, and then reflect back to them. If it is a topic, they may be talking about their dog or their grandchildren. So it's really just whatever's meaningful to them is what's, for me, is what's considered spiritual or religious. And it could be the Broncos, it could be their dog. So just being with whatever is most important. And I usually ask, when I do meet this person the first time, what's most important to you these days or right now? So, because I really want to know, where are they right now? Because they may talk about their career or their past, which is beautiful and meaningful in terms of life review. But I really want to have a sense of, where are they right now? What's the most important to them right now? And it might be they might say spending time with my daughter. Then I know what's most important to them, so I can support whatever that is for them.
I love this broad kind of definition of spirit really being about life and what's important. And I reflect back on my own experience with my mother-in-law when my father-in-law was dying, and I remember her saying, "Oh, sure, social worker visit, bring them on. Chaplain, let's see what they have to say." And I remember thinking, "Oh, chaplain, like they're not particularly religious. My husband and I weren't particularly religious." And so I loved her openness to it. She just wanted to know, what did hospice have to offer? And the chaplain who came was remarkable. And after about 3 meetings with her, I remember saying to her, "How did you get this job? I think I want this job." But she did.
Yeah.
And so in the back of my brain for a long time, I thought, maybe I'm getting a master's in divinity someday. Like, who knew? But the value that she brought in just sitting with us and hearing what was happening and hearing what was important, I just never thought that that was. I think I was one of those people who had kind of this chaplain equals priest equals
Yeah.
religion or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. I just didn't understand the depth and the breadth. And so I love how you've both brought that forward, this compassionate container and what's most important. And I'm guessing the two of you must see just like the gamut of people. I mean, what they say is important and what they say matters, and what their connection is to their own spirit is probably remarkable.
Yeah, it truly is. This at times I'm like, I can't believe this is a job and this is my work, that I get to show up, meet all these different incredible people, and really like enter into these spaces of awe for how resilient people are, how open they are to talk about their life at the end. There is a sensitivity and a tenderness always, um, that we meet over and over again. Um,
Resilience
And,
and
and,
what gorgeous words.
and Diane, there are people who can't speak, like people with, say, Alzheimer's, or people who are, say, in their last 2 weeks. And it's such an honor and a privilege just to hold space for them, just to be with, be silent, even people with Alzheimer's who may be walking around and talking, just energetically letting them know we are with them in that moment, and finding some connect point that may not be words, and it may just be bringing a sense of comfort or peace, um, while sitting next to them. So it can also be nonverbal.
I probably mostly it's nonverbal. I always am struck. I go back to Barbara Carnes, great end of life educator, and her statement, people don't die like they do in the movies. And now almost
Yeah.
every time I see someone die in the movies, I think that's not really how it goes. Like that you look good and you're talking and then you just are passing. It's like it's a process. And I think the body has to labor to die in many cases, obviously not in sudden deaths and so on. So your role as chaplain is part of that labor, and that takes time, and a lot of it is nonverbal.
yeah,
And I think
and
it's
we
also
care
a
for.
comfort level. Yeah, please.
Go on.
Go ahead, Kathy, you start.
I
Go
was
ahead.
saying, just saying, started that, just being comfortable while the body is shutting down, that labor part, is also important, helping educate the family what's happening and normalizing the process, because it can be scary for people who've just seen it on TV and it's their first experience. So that's a piece of it too.
Hugely scary and huge education. And in that regard, you're kind of just another voice in the hospice team of educating, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Ellie, what were you going to add?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess just to add on to that, um, so much of our job is normalizing this human condition, and the dying process. And it helps relax the individual knowing what may happen or what is happening, or that sound or that breathing pattern is okay. Um, and one of the most beautiful aspects of the dying journey that I found is that oftentimes there's this moment of lucidity that can happen. And educating the family members that that lucidity might show up during that process of dying helps the family be aware and attentive, um, to that moment showing up. I remember telling a family member about this, and we use Barbara's booklet all the time, Gone from My Sight. And that is a huge aid in helping to educate people about dying. Um, but he had a moment with his father before he entered into his dying process where he had um, dementia, and he had this clarity come to him, and he talked about his life with his son and how much he's going to miss his grandchildren and what he wants to pass on. And then his son knew that he was in that moment of clarity because of our education. And then he had a few days later entered into his dying process. So
Beautiful.
education can really assist in having the family members be really present.
Have them be sort of ready for those moments and those both of lucidity and of ending speaking or lucidity. I remember also reading a book where the man's wife had begun a dying process, and he said, he was sort of like, oh no, that was our last conversation. Like, I didn't know that was our last conversation. So how do you prepare for those kind of transitions that are shocking and they're coming, and it's best if you've got someone really supporting you in that, which makes me think about how key the hospice role is in for the family, almost more than the dying person, or equally important to the dying person. Would you agree?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, we always say that we are here for the family as much as we are here for the patient.
Yeah.
It's one unit of care, and their family members are not separate from the patient, and how they're cared for affects the patient. Oftentimes people are worried or feel concerned for those that they're leaving behind, you could say.
And there's often there's so many opportunities for just everyday rituals to do with the family to help them either say goodbye to their loved ones, gathering, looking at pictures, just the most natural everyday, having family gathering in a meal together. So there's also that, along with the suffering, there's also like this celebration of their life. And we often encourage families to do kind of a life review with their loved one, because that seems to be something that's really helpful to for someone to pass. It's almost, over the years of my experience, almost like a prerequisite in some way. And so that can be done looking at photo albums, that can be done having a little party, that can be done whatever's authentic and meaningful for the family. And often that piece at the end of giving permission to their loved one is huge, where we work with the families in whatever way is natural to them, helping them say thank you or goodbye in whatever way, again, is natural for them. Because that piece, because often the person dying is wanting to make sure that whoever they're leaving behind is okay, that's their part of that letting go. And so we work with families all the time about that piece of hospice, and telling the person, all your business affairs are taken care of, we're going to take care of each other, you don't have to worry about anything, your work is done here. And that piece, Diana, is so huge. And families helping their loved one pass, and us helping the families help their loved one pass. So that's a big piece.
Feel that, like I can feel that if you can truly take that in, and you feel that your loved ones are okay, as you said, quote unquote okay, then there is this restfulness, like you can just sink back into. And I imagine the agitation of, if you don't feel that way, if there are unresolved issues, which is sort of what I love about the best life, best death, right? Because I think when we connect with our best death, it does bring us into our best life. So if there's some unresolved thing you wouldn't want to have on your deathbed, is there a way to move it forward now? Not that everything's neatly resolved, but the things that hang over us as these burdens stay with us until the end. And sometimes there's a way to make a shift. Sometimes there's not, but boy, if there is, what that might look like, and how that changes the end game for being able to let go. Yeah, so the two of you, you really swim in these like big areas with people. It's so beautiful. I imagine you being out in these deep ocean waters with people. You're not in the shallow end of the pool.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you feel like are there things you would want to say to people, to listeners about hospice that you feel like are important to know, little nuggets?
Mm.
Mm. Well, I know we're talking about chaplaincy here and we're talking about spiritual care. And so I think I always encourage the welcoming of the whole team. Like you said, your family member was like, okay, I'm open, bring the social worker, bring the chaplain. I think that's important. And of course, everyone has their own autonomy and can choose who they want to have by their side during this intimate time. Um, but so much of it is relationship building and creating a safe, loving container. Um, and it's really beautiful that it's a whole team of people that get to enter into your life. Um, whether that team will be there just for the family or just for the patient or both.
When you say the relationship piece, it reminds me how important it is that how powerful it can be if you can call hospice sooner rather than later. Because I think sometimes people who are unhappy with the hospice experience, they were with hospice for a week and they never saw the same nurse twice and the social worker never got there. Well, there wasn't time. There wasn't time
Mhm.
for
Yeah,
those relational pieces. So I think about how do we, encourage people calling hospice sooner rather than later.
yeah,
It's not a death sentence. It's a lifeline. It's a support.
yeah,
It's ease for that transition and information for everybody.
yeah. And
Yes.
that is so true, Diane. Yeah, that is so true because
Mhm.
it is about that relationship. And there's a trust building, right? These people, we come into people's life at a very vulnerable and intimate time. And so for us to get to know a person and the nuances of the family and dynamics and how we can best be sensitive and support them, um, it happens so much better when there's time for a relationship to be built. And you don't have to be, we have some people on hospice for 2 years. You don't have to wait until the last 2 weeks. And there's often a stigma related to it. And a lot of people who start on hospice get better because they have all this loving attention. And I'll give a short example, a story about how team is so important. And it turns out that we had a woman who couldn't speak, who had MS, who we found out from the family member, and they had they knew how to communicate with her that she wanted, before she died, that she wanted to smoke a cigarette, have a drink, and be around a handsome man. So
Mhm.
we happen to have a male volunteer. And so this goes to show you that because we had been caring for her for over 6 months, we we were able to do this with the family, that we as a team threw her a party. She was a French teacher. We threw a Paris party. We decorated the room and everything Paris. Um, we had a volunteer, male, who at the end of the party, she kicked us all out because she just wanted to hang out with him. And she winked at me to let me know that we had made a good choice. So it can be that simple where it really is the whole team, and just finding out like what would be important to her. And that brought her a lot of joy. And she passed away a couple days later. So again, just an example of how it's the whole team, including volunteers. We have amazing volunteers.
Right. Who can really kind of bring this time to what have you said at the very beginning? Something about how do we make this positive and peaceful? That I think some people are shocked even to hear that that's an option.
Mm. Yeah, it's certainly possible. I think we all want that. So how can we help facilitate that for another? And that's such a beautiful story, Kathy. I love it. That's what it's all about. It's and having someone on hospice for longer than a week, you get to really know what their wishes are and
Yeah.
know that was a French teacher and she would want a party.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You have both worked for different sizes of hospices. Is that right? Are you currently working for a little one, a big one, a medium one?
Yeah, for a little while there, Kathy and I worked for the same hospice. But I've worked for multiple, and they've grown, and now I work for a small hospice, which I truly enjoy most, and I think it's my final hospice that I'll remain at for a while. Um, but there are different sizes, and I think that having a small hospice is wonderful, and provides really intimate care, um, and consistent care too. Because sometimes when it's really big, things can fall through the cracks. But there's lots of different hospices out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's benefits to both. I work for, I think the hospice that I work for has about 200 patients and has enough teams to support those patients. Geographically, I think there's like 8 teams, depending. So however many people are in that area get cared for by a team. So I think there's sometimes more infrastructure. It really depends on the hospice. I think everyone's intentionality is the same. Different hospices, that they're really there. We're all really there to help our patients and families and support each other. And then, of course, sometimes when things get bigger, there's more layers of management, and so that can be a benefit and a detriment. So it really depends. But I think regardless of size, the intentionality is all the same, from one hospice to another, irregardless of size. But I really appreciate the fact that Ellie's working at a smaller one that has definite advantages.
Yeah. I was thinking recently, I mean, if I had advice to give, I would say shop around before you need it. Like, keep your ear to the ground on what different hospices are like in your area, because I do think they're changing a lot currently. Like, there's a lot of additions, and they change size and they change ownership right now, sometimes rapidly. So I think you want to kind of keep your ear to the ground about who is in your area, what they provide, what their references are like, before you really need it. You don't want to have to call them because you're desperate and somebody just took a turn for the worst, and you're in your own grief and you don't even know what you want. So I always think about that, get on it ahead of time. And then I think we've also kind of had a nice thread of saying, just be open to what they have to offer and all their services, because sometimes the chaplain might play a role that's even more touching and powerful in your family than you might have realized. Well, I thank you both so much. And both Ellie and Kathy work for hospices, but they're not the be all end all. So we kind of talked about, we weren't necessarily going to give websites for those, but look up hospices in your area, reach out to me if you have trouble finding anything. And thank you both for joining me today and having this conversation about hospice chaplains.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Best Life, Best Death podcast. I'm Diane Hullett, and you can find out more about the work I do at bestlifebestdeath.com. And if you want to reach out, find me there. Thanks for listening.